Segment 3, Gold and Black Live, and our special guest, Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star, longtime beat writer for IU football and basketball. We could just have 18 minutes of silence here because there's no game Saturday, but we obviously had planned this before. But there's a lot to talk about, and obviously, Zach, an amazing season for Indiana. And yet it's got to be a little bit of a disappointment for Indiana because not only were they an 11-point favorite going into this game had it been played, an opportunity to hang another eye on the bucket. At least it sure looked that way based on where the Hoosiers were.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody feels sort of the pointed loss of the rivalry game. And what I've said this week when I've been asked about it, because I'm always careful talking about Indiana because I attended Indiana for college, and I recognize how quickly the perception can kind of turn in one direction or another. But actually, I grew up in Georgia.
Yeah.
So I grew up in SEC country. I was born and raised in Atlanta. And the thing that's always struck me that one of the things that separates, I think, the SEC and the Big Ten, and it's not like, Big 12 has Bedlam and the Red River Shootout, and the West Coast has the game, and it has, the Civil War between Oregon and Oregon State. But the depth and history, I think, of the rivalries in those two conferences has always just felt different. Even when you talk about, obviously, in the SEC, the big ones are the Iron Bowl and the cocktail party between Georgia and Florida, and there's others that are relevant year to year. In the Big Ten, obviously, the probably biggest one is the game. But even when you look at something like the Bucket Game or the Egg Bowl, or I don't think there's technically a name for Tennessee, Georgia, but those are moments that, like, I didn't grow up a Georgia fan by any means.
Yeah.
But I have memories surrounding Georgia-Florida games, or being at a family reunion watching Georgia-Tennessee games. These are things that just kind of mark the passing of time for us, And when you lose those, obviously, I think that's probably what everyone felt about the season in general, and getting it back has probably helped some of that. But when you lose those, I think it's hard not to sort of grieve for them a little bit, whatever side of it you fall on, however you thought the game was going to go. And certainly for Indiana, listen, this would have been the first time since 2000. I think I'm not even sure because they didn't beat Michigan State in 2007.
Yeah.
So I'm honestly not sure the last time Indiana had both of its trophies at the same time, which is obviously the opportunity they would have been playing for if the Bucket Game were happening Saturday, since they beat Michigan State earlier in the year. So it would have been just, if Indiana could have won that game, it would have been just kind of another notch, and as you said, a season that obviously for Indiana is just kind of kept rising. But for me, I've written about this, kind of this earlier this fall, and I think it's relevant with the rivalry game too. I think what you lose is, just that memory you have of, where you were when you watched X rivalry, or like I said, I was not by any means a Georgia fan growing up. But I remember exactly where I was when the Veron Haynes hobnail boot game happened, and Larry Munson, we ripped out their hearts and stomped on them with the hobnail boot.
Yeah.
Those are the things that kind of make college sports special, and losing them is always just kind of sad, really.
Yeah. No doubt.
Yeah, Zach, it's been a special year for IU. Like you said, it's kind of sad not having the old Oaken Bucket this year. First time since pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic. I think 1917, 1918, the teams or the schools didn't meet, and then met every year since 1920 up until this year. I'm sure, like you said, IU would have loved to have finished the year by keeping the bucket for a second year in a row. Obviously, not only did Purdue have some COVID issues that led to the mutual cancellation of this game, but obviously Indiana did too. I guess, Indiana's got a lot more still at stake this year than Purdue, 6-1, going to go to a bowl game. I guess I'm curious if you have any inside knowledge or just general knowledge if Indiana's going to be able to play next week in their crossover game. And moving forward, I know the bowl game would be further down the road, but I guess more to the point of sense of urgency of next week in IU situation personnel-wise.
Yeah, it's not clear on next week yet, and IU is not is being a little bit tight-lipped. I think we will learn a little bit more tonight. IU's athletic director Scott Dolson is actually scheduled to speak on Tom Allen's radio show, and obviously I think I think that's in part just because there's a lot of different things that we'd all probably want to ask Seth Dolson about right now, the COVID issue, the Big Ten championship game issue, the college football playoff rankings. The one thing I'll say is I don't get the sense that it is like a huge outbreak. I think there's some places where we've seen a couple dozen or more, positives across players and staff. I don't think it's necessarily kind of that widespread. So I don't know that it would threaten anything like a bowl game or bowl prep or anything like that. But I think it is early to say for next week, which, is potentially a big game for Indiana because it's at least right now. I know there's maybe some wheels turning, trying to make different things happen around the league, Minnesota, Wisconsin, maybe, and stuff like that. If things work out as they're, sort of as it seemed like they were supposed to when this was all proposed, Indiana would play Iowa. I think at home is it sounds like is the way that is kind of trending. And that would obviously be a chance to add a quality win. But at the same time, if you do have significant personnel concerns, I think that there's been some understandable criticism, for example, in the SEC, when we've seen SEC teams have to play games with fewer than 50 players available, not just from a competitive perspective, but potentially also from a health perspective, asking a significantly undermanned team to go out and try and win a game like that, I think would be, I don't know how willing Indiana would be to entertain that. And then I guess the follow-on to that is I don't know if that would be good or bad for the Indiana's, sort of profile in the eyes of the playoff committee. But that's why I think there's going to be an awful lot of watch this space in Bloomington for the next, 5-6 days.
Indiana, you talk about this, and this is no disrespect to the program, but it's amazing that, you're having these conversations. This is a team that's New Year's Day 6 is in the room. Tom Allen has done the job bringing this program up. And I know COVID is as it is, but still surprise you just to how far this program has gotten in where it is right now, where it's not only is he a great chance at National Coach of the Year, but this is a team that truly could finish in the top 5 if it continues, wins gets a chance to play next week and wins its last game in a bowl game, who knows?
Yeah. Certainly I think achievement at this level, I would not have predicted this going into the season. And as you said, there's probably some factors elsewhere, what's happened at Michigan, what's happened at Penn State, that have affected it a little bit too. I think the one thing, and I suspect this is largely just because for all of us, it feels like history started on March 11th, 2020 right now. Yeah. But I can remember in the aftermath of the Gator Bowl, literally the day after, because I flew from Jacksonville to Washington, D.C. to cover a basketball game. And on the flight, I wrote sort of a season post-mortem of Indiana's 2019 season. And the overarching thrust of it, without wanting to be flippant about it, was basically that it felt like there was this sort of collision coming between the understandable sort of cynicism that IU fans have after many, many years of disappointment and failure. And what was, shaping up on paper, if nothing dramatic happened, to be a very, very good team. Now, I didn't necessarily think it would be a team that would be in contention into the last week of the regular season for a Big Ten championship berth or, playing in the New Year's Six, but it was a team that won 8 games, was going to return most of its starters, certainly most of its starters at key positions, quarterback, wide receiver, tackle, pretty much just almost everywhere on defense. Just the sort of the natural evolution of teams like that is that they tend to just keep getting better. And so to see it kind of all sort of unfold as it has this year, obviously, I don't think anybody saw that coming. But, even as far as January, it did feel like there was kind of this conflict between the general acceptance that IU football, at least among its fans, that IU football often just seems to sort of exist to underwhelm, sort of juxtaposed against what is just a deep and well-constructed roster, and one that, maybe probably took some lumps in Tom Allen's first 2 seasons, played a lot of guys young, and there were some gaps in the roster, just some recruiting class misses that added up on Indiana that wound up kind of in the Kevin Wilson, Tom Allen transition, forcing them to play some young guys in key spots. But now those young guys are juniors and seniors, and they've played a ton of football, and they've played it together, and you see the result.
Zach, Indiana has handled this situation about the rule change the Big Ten enacted on Wednesday with great aplomb. I saw the statement they issued the other day, and again, it's a hard thing to do. I'm sure they were very disappointed. I guess I'd like to know how you felt about the decision by the Big Ten to switch that rule to drop the number of game requirement to get Ohio State into the Big Ten title game. It cost it would be a very costly move for Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, and I've written this. I just don't think there's a way you can really argue against it. I mean, I think it, and again, like I can think about all the years that I was growing up watching SEC football where Georgia and Florida are duking it out in the East, and the loser of the Georgia-Florida game wants to be taken seriously as a national title contender, and people say, well, then you need to be playing in the SEC title game. And they say, well, we can't, and you say, well, that's because you got your chance and you lost. Your SEC title game was the one that you lost to Florida, and that's why you're not going to get a chance to play for a national championship. But I think I think Indiana, and in fairness to them, I would say that obviously the fan sentiment is what it is, and fans are upset, and you understand fans, sort of have that is just part of their sort of role in all this, I suppose. But I would say the prevailing sentiment from within the program and within the department is, frankly, just the understanding that Indiana got a shot against Ohio State and it played great. And I think it felt sort of proud of the way it acquitted itself that day, not wanting to talk about moral victories or anything, but felt like it really sort of put its best foot forward or something approximating it. But Indiana did lose that game. And, with the Big Ten tiebreakers as they are this season specifically, Ohio State could have played Michigan this weekend and lost 500-0. Mm-hmm. And they'd still have the tiebreaker and they'd still go to Indianapolis. And so, I don't know that there was any real prevailing sense from within IU that, that this wasn't going to feel a little bit like kind of making it on a technicality. Not that they don't feel they deserve, recognition for what they've done. Of course they do. And I think they're getting it. But I also think that, from kind of IU's perspective, they were going to fight for themselves. Scott Dolson did not vote to put Ohio State in the championship game. And you would expect that he would fight for his team. But I think that, even within the department and perhaps even within the program, there is sort of an acknowledgement that, listen, we got it. Now, I think the interesting conversation would be if Ohio State were 5-0 and Indiana were 6-1 and they hadn't played. I think that would be the more, sort of layered conversation from where I sit, and without wanting to speak for anybody else, but my sense from, within IU as a whole, is just that, Indiana's had a great season and they got a chance to beat Ohio State. And if they had, they'd be getting ready for Northwestern in whatever, 9 days, 10 days, whatever it is. But they didn't. And, Ohio State's going to play in Indianapolis.
Tom Allen has been an amazing story, like we talked about, obviously on a national level, how well he's done. What you've covered many coaches at Indiana, both in basketball and football, but what makes him, we kind of see, from a Purdue perspective, or at least from my observing perspective, you see his energy, you see what he brings, his passion, he brings to the fore, but there's something else, obviously. What really makes him good, in your opinion, and what makes him such a good fit in Bloomington?
Yeah, obviously people see the passion and they see sort of the relationship he has with his players. I think that kind of really sort of went viral after the Wisconsin game, all the players stopping and hugging him during his interview with Holly Rowe. I think the thing that I come back to a lot, and as sports writers, I think sometimes we're conditioned to sort of tune out a lot of cliches because we just hear them so much, and we hear them because they endure. That's why they stick around. That's why they are so durable. But we're always kind of looking to move beyond that to whatever's kind of, whatever's behind it statistically or story wise or whatever. When you hear all the stuff Tom Allen talks about, I know there are people, even I think probably up until last season, this season, I would even hear from IU fans who would say they felt, oh, this is cheesy, it's whatever. but it works, and it inspires. I think that the biggest thing that it feels for me is it inspires a level of belief that I think is very difficult at a place like Indiana. It's not hard to convince a kid upon arrival at Ohio State that he's going to win a lot of football games, because he's going to look around and he's going to say, I'm really good, and my teammates are really good, and my coaches are really good. And all that's proven out by the fact that every single season we win a lot of games. Obviously, to be at Ohio State requires an elite level of talent, and that's a reflection of what those players are capable of. But it's harder to engender that sort of belief, that just sort of fundamental, kind of base level belief at a place like Indiana, where, of course, winning has been very difficult for a very long time. And he does it. And you kind of wind up in a situation where, Indiana has recruited better in the last few years. It hasn't been dramatically better. It's really, I think, what Indiana's gotten right from a recruiting perspective has more been the depth and the quality. If you kind of talk about recruiting numbers in the aggregate, the quality of the players in the class that don't wind up being stars, but wind up giving you that depth in your twos or your threes, because that was what would always get Indiana in upset bids was, their starters maybe could go something approximating toe-to-toe with Michigan, but at some point those starters would either get tired and falter, or they'd need to come out, and the guys behind them just weren't good enough to hold the standard, and then the game would get away from them. And that's the big part of what's changed from a roster perspective. But I also just think from a culture perspective, everybody within that locker room believes that this is what Indiana was always building toward being capable of. And I think it's not so much even the results that I think have sort of borne that out this season, but it's the way that Indiana's responded to them. Like a lot of us really wondered, what would Indiana look like Rutgers week? Rutgers comes off of probably a pretty big victory in their own mind at Michigan State. Indiana spent an entire week just sort of soaking up all this unexpected attention after the Penn State game. And they didn't play their best game at Rutgers, but they go out there and they win by 16 points. How would they handle a road trip to Michigan State, knowing what was potentially on the horizon at Ohio State? They go up there and they win by 24. They shut Michigan State out. Michigan State never even crosses the 35. And so I think that just speaks to kind of that level of confidence in that Tom Allen has been able to build in his team, that, we're all surprised about this, but whatever the method of it, they haven't been. And that's, I think, why they've been able to just kind of keep, building these results forward, regardless of what's happened this year.
Tom, we have time for one more, but and always a reminder, run a Zoom call when the phone rings in the background. My apologies, but Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, now you have a hot commodity in Tom Allen, Zach. You think he's there for the long haul, or do you see him becoming the object of some other schools' eyes here in the near future?
I think I think that's going to be a question on a lot of people's minds. I don't think for 1 minute Indiana's administration is sort of numb to that or ignorant of that. Obviously, from a dollars and cents perspective, he did sign a new contract last year that makes his pay more competitive. It also takes his buyout up to about $23.5 million. Now, of course, as these things go, that falls, as the years go on. So it potentially becomes easier, especially as, maybe the financial situation in college athletics starts to stabilize. Maybe it becomes easier for someone else to approach him. But I also wouldn't be surprised if Indiana, especially after a season like this, tries to come back to him and say, well, is there some way we can improve the terms and, maybe lock you in longer? And I think, we haven't really seen his name connected seriously to any major jobs this offseason. I also don't think that there's necessarily been a job that's come open yet that would maybe warrant leaving a team that's, as things stand right now, especially with the NCAA rule about everyone getting the blanket eligibility waiver, could yet again be very good next year if a number of players stick around. If a big enough program called, I can't say that he wouldn't listen. Again, I wouldn't want to put words in his mouth, but at this point, I think certainly everyone in Indiana is aware that of what having a season like this at IU is going to do to a coach's profile. And I would be surprised if they aren't working, sort of proactively to try and do what they can to make sure they protect, the I guess you'd say the direction of the program moving forward.
Yeah, interesting point, and what an amazing season it's been for Indiana. It's too bad that we didn't have that because it's all the bucket game is always not always competitive, but often competitive, and it would have been an interesting game to see come to the fore. So I don't even know when Purdue and Indiana play in basketball this year. I haven't put my basketball.
I think it's in mid June, and then the last game. I know Indiana's last game of the season's at Purdue. I think the one in Bloomington's in mid June. But to your point, I think I saw a statistic this week that Indiana Purdue had of all the traditional rivalries had the most one score games in its history. I think that it might have been 45-46, and I don't remember. It was just one of those. It was a tweet that just scrolled across my face and then it was gone. So forgive me, I don't remember who said it, but
I think that's correct. Yeah,
I think Indiana Purdue, the bucket game has more one score finishes in either direction than any other traditional rivalry in college football.
Yeah, interesting, and it has been a good one, and we'll look forward to it in 2021, and that is a certain thing. All right, I want to thank Gordon Jackson and Scott Sumner with WLFI for making today happen. And of course, Zach Osterman and Tom Dienhart, Brian Newbert as well. Kyle Nedenreep also has joined us in segment 2. We appreciate that too. So have a great week, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Again, thanks, Zach, and good luck with your travels throughout the rest of this football season. And we'll look forward to talking again soon. And we'll look forward to next week on Gold and Black Live.